There is time, Teresa, where are you, for a few questions, and these are to be yes and no kind of questions. So if you have a simple, easy question, you can ask it now. There are mics down here at the front of each aisle. If you would make sure, don't deliver a speech, make it a simple question, make it brief, and make it easy for me to answer.
It was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I was wondering about the kind of vision you had for the college, that every student would leave here with this understanding. If you or the college has been engaged programmatically in thinking about how that could be realized here, that everybody understands the, ecosystem challenges.
Now you're asking me to explain what I actually meant. Well, two responses to that. One is, I think that the way to start this is a very large conversation, and to begin to recalibrate and reposition the college in a way that we do our business commensurate with the way the world works as a physical system and the way it's headed. This isn't the time for complacency, as I said. For my part, people learn differently. They're visual learners, they're people who learn with their hands, they're people who learn by doing, they're people who learn by reading. But I think for the most part, something like 90%, I'm told, of our sensory apparatus is in fact in our eyes. And so we mostly believe what we see, touch, feel, experience. When we did the Lewis Center, we engaged, 250 or so students to work on the Lewis Center. And the same is true of the Oberlin Project. We've engaged a lot of students to work on the Oberlin Project, the remaking of our own city, and beginning to shift the city toward sustainability and climate neutrality and resilience and so forth. So one way to begin to think about this is begin with a large conversation. As a footnote to this, there was an article written by Bill Joy in Wired magazine, April of 2000. It was called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." And he called for a moratorium on anything that could self-replicate, so nanotechnologies, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering. Now, Bill Joy is the founder, one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. This is not a guy who's a, quote, Luddite. And that article came out, beautifully written, circulated around the world. I don't know of a single college or university that said, hey, wait a minute, let's stop doing what we're doing and let's talk. And I'll give every department $10,000 to organize a debate within the department, but let's talk. And then let's come together in a campus-wide dialogue of some sort. Don't know anybody that did that. And there's kind of a Gresham's law, the bad money drives out good money, equivalent in the way organizations work. Routine drives out big issues. We should have sat down and talked. Whatever your position on his view was, we should have talked about that. But routine tends to drive these things out. So anyway, I think a large conversation is in order. And I think engaging students, as one of the great things that Oberlin does. Norm Craig in chemistry and all the science faculty have done this for years. My colleague John Peterson and Rumi Shaman and Cindy France and so forth pull students into their research projects. And that's a way to engage them in this activity. But engagement of students in the real work of thinking and beginning to reconsider where we are and why we're here and so forth, I think is an important way to start this. That's a poor answer to a very good question, but I didn't have PowerPoint here to work with.
I was wondering if you could describe your hope.
Describe?
Your hope.
My hope. Well, we have another hour to talk about this. The people will say that when you look at the numbers of the earth and they're going down like this or up like this, that's just the science. That, gee, that's so depressing. And my attitude toward that is kind of irreverent. If you're depressed by depressing things, that's probably a good thing. If you're not depressed by depressing things, I find that depressing. And so our point is simply take the science, have the courage to look down the barrel of where we are and understand the numbers. And then within what are called the error bars of what we believe to be true, then be as hopeful, optimistic, and so forth as you can be. But it's a little hard to look at all those numbers, as Martin Rees did, that I quoted, and come back and say, I'm so hopeful about the human future. It's so optimistic. On the other side, if you're in despair, that's a sin. You don't want to go there. But if you're optimistic or despairing, you don't have to do anything. Do you follow what I'm saying? You can sit there, you can pop the top. It's like I said once, it's like being a New York Yankees fan and having Mariano Rivera in his prime pitching, and you got 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth. You're ahead by 2 runs, and you got 2 strikes on a 200 hitter, and you're going to win the game. That's optimism. Now, I'm a Cleveland Indians fan, have been since 1954, and we understand original sin and heartbreak and so forth. Anyway, but that's optimism. But either being optimistic or despairing, you don't have to do anything. Hope is different. Hope requires us to act. It is that verb with its sleeves rolled up. And one of the great things about this college and all of you and the people engaged here is that we do things. This is a hopeful place. And then one last thing I would say about this. If we're mesmerized or paralyzed by big numbers, I think that's wrong. E.F. Schumacher, the great British economist, years ago wrote a little book called Guide for the Perplexed, taking the title from Maimonides. And what he said at the end of the book was, if you ask the question, can we survive? And the answer comes back, no, well, it's eat, drink, and be merry. We all head over for the fev. If you answer the question, yes, then you get complacent. You don't do anything. And his answer was better not to even pose the question, simply get down to work. So what makes me hopeful is the work of all of you in this room. And if I had said there was an environmental movement, a global environmental movement 25 years ago, about the time I came here, that wasn't true. That would have been blowing smoke. But the fact is now, no matter where you go, there are actively people engaged in changing the planet. And so we're in a race, and I think H.G. Wells said it maybe best, that we're in a race between education on one side and catastrophe on the other. This is an educational issue. The take-home message from my talk is that education isn't number 9 on the list after we solve economic issues and technological issues and all these things. No, we'll finally get to reforming schools. No, no, no. We are dead central to the solution of these issues. Those 3 gyres and 50 more you could name. Those have to be solved by people thinking differently, and that starts in places like this. And one of the great things here, I think that one of our huge assets is that we have a great conservatory of music. We have a great performing arts program. We have a great science program and social sciences and humanities and so forth. Imagine a conversation of those coming together that hits both sides of the human mind. My granddaughter, who's not here, but she's age 11, and she is, has the personality of Queen Elizabeth I on steroids. She will say, "Granddad, your talk is a great talk, but you're boring." And that's when Elaine and I cut her out of the will. The issue is that we talk of parts per million, parts per billion, sciencey, wonky kinds of things. We've got to begin to engage the arts and music and culture. This is a big conversation. And there's no institution anywhere on this planet that can do a better job of that than Oberlin College can. Okay, John, make this easy. This is John Bergen, if you don't know.
I apologize in advance. First, David, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done to mentor students like myself, even when we don't always listen to you or do what you think is best. But I wanted to ask you...
Now it comes. That was called sucking up. Now we're
It's all downhill from here. You talked a lot about the role of faculty in education. I wonder if you could say what your thoughts are on the role of administration and maybe board of trustees, other members of the college, not just in facilitating education, but in being educators for creating students who can create change in the world. Is that an easy question?
Is there another question? John, I think that actually is a good question. Thanks for asking it. An educational institution is an interesting kind of thing, and I've seen the inside. My dad was the college president for 17 years, so I saw the inside of what it's like. It's why I determined early in life I'd never, ever do what Marvin Krisloff does. I'd never be a college president. But when you're on the inside, things look a little bit different. And so what my answer is that the college has got an incredible senior staff. I've seen them work. And you go down the list. Jane Matheson has got to be the best chief of staff anywhere. There are a lot of good things that happen because of her, and a lot of bad things that don't happen because of her, but it's mostly below the radar screen. And Ron Watts, the chief financial officer of the college, has done an amazing job just keeping things together, hugely dedicated and very professional. And Bill Barlow is running a great capital campaign. And Tita Reed, my colleague, talks with the community all the time. And Ben Jones, who talks to the wider public, makes us look sometimes better than we are, but his job is to tell our story, and he does it extremely well. This is, and the deans and so forth, this is a remarkable senior staff, and I've seen them work hard and so forth. I can't criticize them for that. What I can say relative to your question is this. This is a time for a big conversation. If there ever was, it is now. And the hard thing for us to come to grips with is that we're close to a precipice. If you pull climate scientists in or biodiversity experts and so forth, the evidence is very clear that we are trending toward catastrophe. At the very best you could hope for, it's a terribly threadbare, biologically impoverished planet. That's simply the science. At the very worst, it is a planet in which climate change goes into runaway mode, and it's going to be a little bit like being, as somebody once put it, on a boat upstream from Niagara Falls, and your engine fails. And so that's where we are. That's simply where we are. That's not depressing. That's just the science. And so I think what's called on is for us to reach back into our strengths, the considerable strengths and the legacy of this institution. We've stood for things in the past, and we've stood well for them. This is an incredibly great liberal arts college, and for my money, it's the best anywhere. But that conversation has to begin, and it's got to include everybody. Now, this doesn't mean that we're all going to use the word sustainable and come to the same definition of that word. That word is complicated, and we throw these words out as if their meaning is clear. They're not clear, but that's part of the debate here. And that would be a worthy thing to debate in classes. What does sustainability, kind of an awful word generally, what does that mean relative to, let's say, ethics and philosophy, or to economics, or to politics? Now, that's a conversation worth having. I don't know where this comes out, but let's have that conversation. And I don't think there's an institution anywhere I know better positioned to have that conversation at the depth and at the scale it deserves. John, thanks for that question. And now we're going to talk about fracking, right?
No, we're going to talk about great conversations. Fortunately, Oberlin has a wonderful tradition of exactly what you were asking for, beginning with President Finney, who was not afraid to cancel classes to have great conversations. And for many years, we had the tradition of the mock convention, which brought students and faculty together to discuss and develop ways to act on the great issues of the day. So there's plenty in our tradition to call on and say, this is what we should be doing, we know how to do it, let's do it.
This is, for those of you who don't know John Elder, John was the wonderful pastor at First Church up here, and if you go into that building, Charles Grandison Finney preached in there, and if you go into that building where John presided over the First Church congregation, and you get real quiet, you can still hear the hellfire and brimstone from Charles Grandison Finney. But John, you're right. This is an institution that has fostered those conversations. And I think that we're, in the national press, we're small, we're 2,300 students or some such. We're a small town in the middle of north central Ohio. It's kind of a Rust Belt area. But we are positioned to have the conversation necessary here.
Hi, I'm interested in what you called cultivating affection, and I can understand how that happens from parent to child or talking to someone and they say like, oh, that's a good idea, let me try and do that. How do we do that on a macro level? How do we make that a way of life?
Boy, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. Short answer is I don't know, and here's part of the problem. To have this kind of conversation at the national scale is remarkably difficult with the way the media is organized and funded at this time. And so the odd thing is, if you go back in our history or American history to, let's say, the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, 7 debates around the state of Illinois. The issue at stake was a seat in the U.S. Senate. And Lincoln and Douglas went around Illinois and they dealt with the issues of their day, mostly slavery, the tariff, and sectionalism. And if you go back and read the transcript, there were long debates. Each speaker had an hour, and then there was an extended rebuttal, and then the initial speaker then came back with his rebuttal. And people think of this. There were no comfortable seats there. These were oftentimes farmers standing in the field. There was no sound system. And they followed those debates. You can tell they followed them because if you look at the transcript, they laughed, they jeered, they applauded, and so forth. Those were citizens. And those were people willing to wrestle with the real issues of their day. And by comparison, as important as slavery was at that time, it was a U.S. issue. It concerned mostly the eastern and southern seaboard states. Now the issues are permanent, and they're global. And they affect all of us. It's now the health of the planet. And that's simply, again, the science. And so, but our debate, ironically, has shrunk to this level. More and more sound bites as the scale and salience of the issues has gone up like this. So how do we have that debate? I don't know. One of the things, I can't see much of a way forward without political change that takes the airwaves back. And I can't see, I said in my remarks, I think that starts by reclaiming our language. I think Orwell was exactly right. If you haven't read 1984, read it and read all of Orwell. I think he was right about that. That without the integrity of words and being able to stand by those words, I mean, how was it that conservatism became a position whereby people were willing to run risks with the whole earth and for all time as we would measure time? How does that qualify as conservatism? Do you follow what I'm saying? And you can make your own list of language where words have been corrupted, the meaning they don't mean what they supposed to or they once meant. So how do we start that? And our business here in a lot of ways is thinking, and thinking requires the effective use of language with integrity, where meanings are clear and are solid and don't change. And at the national level, if you look at poll data on things like climate change, the public, in fact, is with us. We're not so far out as we think we are. The public is, in fact, over a majority of the last 2 years, Tony Lacerowitz at Yale has showed poll data that indicates the public, in fact, is with us. And so how do we begin to take public opinion and render that into public policy? And the problem we face is that on this side of that Grand Canyon chasm, there is a scientific discourse, and over here, there is a public discourse, and the bridges that used to connect science and public policy are broken, and they're the media and they're politics. So when I look at this, language and politics are going to be really critical to making that change, and that is our strong suit here at Oberlin. Thanks for that question.
Hi. I obviously can't express my gratitude and indebtedness to you here, but thank you for everything that you've done for me in this place. Can this conversation happen? Can this broad conversation, can the change that you see needing to happen in a capitalist system?
Marvin, it's time to end. Well, you know, it's one of these questions like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I say, yeah, maybe. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, no way, no how. And so, David, that's a really good question. Thanks for asking it. My own opinion is that to recalibrate our means of livelihood, how we provision ourselves with food, healthcare, shelter, and so forth over here, with the way the world works over here, probably can't be done in a capitalist system as we presently have it. And that is, then there's a long lecture that follows. I'm part of an organization that includes Gus Speth, former dean at Yale, and other people that are trying to rethink the economy. And how do you keep from tossing babies out with bathwater? And let me say only two things. Let that question stand. I don't think there's an authoritative answer I can give, but all of us, and here at Oberlin, ought to take that as a challenge to rethink our means of livelihood. I think that is terribly important. And so let that question just hang in the air. There's no definitive answer I could give. And secondly, I think we know some things. I think we know that we were never as rich as we thought we were from simply economic data. And the terrible irony in this, of course, is that we are wealthier than we knew we were when we thought we were merely rich. And I mean wealthier in human context, in our legacy, in the bonds that hold us together, those connective tissues. So that's one way to begin to rethink the economy and reposition our loyalties and so forth. There's a second point that I said in my remarks, that we pay for quality of life and sustainability and resilience and justice, whether we get it or not. And we can pay less now, or we can pay more in the future. Somebody once pointed out that a year in the federal penitentiary and a year at Oberlin cost about the same. The curriculum is different, but the cost is about the same. And so in one case, programs like child care and daycare and paying attention to health and fairness and decency and justice and employment, those are important things to do. And they save you money long term. So this is just a long-winded way of saying that I think the economy that works is one that has to see itself as part of a larger horizon, on a larger horizon. It has to have a longer worldview. And let me close with this. I think the job of education is to equip a generation of young people who see the world as systems and patterns and interconnections. We are connected. Ian Forster had it right. Our job is to perceive that and to act as if those connections are real and to make them more meaningful. That is a very different kind of world, and I think a very different kind of economy. But keep asking that question, as I know you will. Thanks, David.